Okay, so let's focus on topic 3 now. The focus is on information in the left column in table 2, but you do reference information. Forget that part. Just don't even worry about that part. I'll probably delete this by the time you get to this video. Focus is on information in the left column. So if you're going for that A-level response, of course, you would have a sentence that introduces the topic, but it's very trivial and kind of a detractor to just say, I'm going to focus on information left column. Why don't you be more specific? What kind of information is presented in the left column? So in this paragraph, I'm going to be focusing on what? This with respect to the blank that I earned and what the, and this. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the prompt. It says, look at the feedback provided by the professor for your attempts to clarify your own arguments. What, if any, mistakes did she note with respect to your first attempt? So this is going to be the one that you might discuss the most. I don't know. So you'll look at your score, and you might say that. You can say, for my first attempt, I made a blank, or my score was blank. The reason, the professor noted, or Dr. Carrillo noted, or the reason for this, as noted by professor, is as follows. Or one reason why I made the score has to do with. So when I give you your argument format, argument feedback, your argument work feedback, I tended to do it in terms of categories. So I let you know about your bonus. So I let you know about your markup, and then I let you know about reformatting and uniform language. When it came to the first argument task, I might have given you general feedback. And of course, you should have that all here. So did I make any general comments? Did I say that you seem to have a handle on the concepts, but there was room for improvement? I don't want you to just copy and paste what you have here down here. I want you to highlight, make sense of, elaborate on things. So you can get the gist. You can say, well, she started with a general comment saying, that I seem to know some stuff, but I needed to work on some things that I might still be confused about. And then you want to get into specifics. Specifics, but not too specific. So let me give you an example of the first one. So you can talk about like the categories of score. So you can say, for my markup, I lost X number of points in total. The kinds of mistakes I made with respect to markup is I didn't always label my premises correctly, or I didn't use the concept of a final conclusion, or, she said that I created a sentence fragment when there wasn't one. She said that I did not bracket and number every statement. So, or, I made mistakes with bracketing and numbering. So that kind of thing, okay? So make sure that, you get into that. Now, let's look at the second question. How do the mistakes noted by the professor in your second attempt compare with the mistakes she noted in your first attempt? So now this is comparative. So you can still start out by saying, for my markup, I lost this many points, and for my reformatting and uniform language, I lost this many points. And then you compare it. You can say, unlike my markup for the first argument submission for week 6, in my week 8 markup, I didn't make mistakes with bracketing and numbering. Instead, the mistakes I made had to do with, but the mistakes that I made with respect to labeling in my week 8 submission do compare to week 6, because in both of my submissions, I labeled one of the statements as a subconclusion, and it was just a premise according to Dr. Carrillo or Professor Carrillo, or Dr. C or Professor C. So you're talking about the mistakes you made, the feedback that I gave you with respect to the mistakes you made by comparing it to the kind of mistakes. So what you can do is you can compare in 2 ways. Compare how many points you lost for your markup and the kinds of mistakes you made, bracketing, numbering, labeling, creating sentence fragments, correcting sentence fragments in the original response, using terms like subconclusion or premise incorrectly. You will talk about those in comparison to this one over here. So you can go by category, and then so you can do what kind of scores deduction, how much did you get deducted for markup on this one compared to this one? Did you get more points off for markup compared to this one? Did you get less points off for markup compared to this one? Did you make the same kind of mistakes? Okay, if not, then what kind of mistakes did you make in here that you didn't make in here? Or if you did make the same kind of mistakes, you can say, yes, I made the same kind of markup mistakes as I did in here. So you'll have all of this feedback that you'll be able to look at, right, with the scores and whatnot. So you might, if you have the feedback, then you should have the deductions as well. I don't need you to break down the deductions that far. So you don't need to say, I lost 5 points for labeling. I lost 10 points for bracketing and numbering. Just tell me how many points you lost overall for markup, how many you lost overall for reformatting, and then compare that to this. You know, you can compare those numbers to the numbers here, but you should also say maybe highlight one or two things. So yes, like, you know, yeah, I lost a lot of points for markup, or I made mistakes with markup, just like I did with this submission over here. So you get the gist. Now, let's say you turned in something late, and so you didn't get feedback. That might be the case with, you should have still gotten feedback for this one, even if you turned it in late. But for this one, none of you are getting detailed feedback, or very few of you, because it's the end of the semester and, you know, I just have to pretty much score you. But there is some kind of feedback, because I should have still told you what your deductions were for formatting, what your deductions were for markup. So you can still talk about how many points you lost for markup and how many points you lost for reformatting and uniform language. So you can still compare those overall scores. So how does, you know, your score for this compared to these? And you can talk about, wow, you know, by the time I got to the last argument clarification, I was able to lose, you know, I lost a lot less points for markup than I did for the previous two attempts, or I really bombed the last argument clarification. I lost a lot more points for markup as I did compared to week 8 and week 6. And while I might not have given you personalized feedback, like why you lost points, you can still see how many mistakes you made. So you could say something like, well, you know, she didn't give me specific comments for the deductions for markup, but she has several deductions, so you can count them up. So for example, you might see -1, -3, -4. Well, that tells you that there were at least four mistakes in the markup. So you can say, well, she had, you know, I see that she took off points. She took off three different things, because she has a -1, a -4, and a -5 for the markup category. I don't know what those are, but I do know that I made 3 mistakes for the markup, which ended up, you know, in me losing 10 points. So even then, even if you don't have personalized feedback, you can do that. Now, if you turned in something late, I'm pretty sure I still gave you scores by category if I didn't have time to grade it with personalized feedback. Just comment on that. I can always, you know, if I feel like, you know, I know that something weird might have happened. What do you do if you don't have a lot of mistakes? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. So then for the next question, how do any mistakes in your third attempt? Oh, by the way, I don't know if you caught that, but you can also talk about, well, how many mistakes did you make in this one compared to this one? So that's another number you can give. You can count them up. So as you know, I do A, B, C, D. So I'll say A comment, B comment, C comment. You can say, well, I made 3 mistakes, you know, as noted by A, B, and C in the professor's feedback. So you can do stuff like that. I might have limited myself to 3 or 4 comments, even if you had way many more mistakes. You can say that. You can say, wow, I made so many mistakes, but she decided to focus on 3 because she didn't have time to comment on all of them. So I made a lot of mistakes. Or, you know, it could be that I didn't have time. So if you don't want to say that, you can say, well, it could be that I have more than 3 mistakes, but she said she wasn't going to comment on more than 3. And so, but I know that I made at least 3 because she, you know, focused on those. All right, so then we have how many mistakes did you make in your third? How did any mistakes in your third attempt compare to the first and second? So yeah, I think it's good to give numbers, but you also want to talk about how they compare. So I want to emphasize that. So using this one as an example, how does this one compare to this and this? So let's say in this one you lost 14 points for the markup. Well, of course you can compare and say, wow, I lost 21 points for markup here, and 30 points for markup here, so I lost a lot less points for markup. So even if I didn't give you personalized feedback, you can still say things like, I must have done better with what? Well, what is markup? So you can speculate here. Well, since I lost less or got very few points off of markup, I must have done really good with markup. And then just say what markup is. What is markup? So I must have done a pretty good job with bracketing and numbering. Well, what else? What are the other things that you have to do a pretty good job with? What all is entailed? What kinds of things do you mark up? What are the different things that you mark in the argument visually that you must have done good such that you lost very few points? So now you're starting to see. Or let's say for the reformat, you lost 10 points. Okay, so the reformat is only worth 20 points. Let me clarify that right now. 80% of your score is the markup for any of these, 20% of your score is the reformat and uniform language. So if you see that you lost 10 points for a reformat and uniform language, you know that basically you got only 10 out of 20 points, which would be an F, unfortunately. It sounds harsh, but it's a fact. So you can say, wow, I see I only got 10 out of 20 points for my reformat in week 15. I can see that she took off, 5 times. She doesn't tell me what the points taken off for are specifically with respect to the format and the uniform language. But I know I made at least 5 kinds of mistakes, and the fact that I only have 10 out of 20 points shows me that I needed to maybe better apply, better understand, review my notes closer. So that's something that you could say in comparison, or you can make a comment about. You can say, maybe I looked at my notes more closely, maybe I followed her refresher videos more carefully, professor feedback on task. What else do we want to say about this? I think that's going to be it. So then I have, if you did not get any feedback for something, did she say she didn't give you feedback? So I commented on that already, more or less. How often and when? Okay, so here's a very important question. How often or when did you read any feedback provided for the attempts? So when you did this right here, did you first look at the feedback here? If so, how many times did you look at it? Did you look at the feedback only when you noticed that you had a score and you wanted to see what I had to say? Did you make sure you looked at the feedback before submitting this? And so on. Okay, so be specific. Did you look at the feedback for week 8 for week 6 prior to doing week 8? Why or why not? Same thing for week 15. Did you look at the feedback for week 8? Why or why not? When you did week 15, did you look at the feedback for week 6 as well as week 8 to make sure you didn't make any of the previous mistakes? That's very important. What else do I want to say? So yeah, how often and when did you read the feedback? Did you look at the feedback for these two before and after creating your results for this, but before submitting it? So maybe you looked at my feedback, you did this task, and then before you submitted it, you wanted to make sure that you didn't repeat any mistakes in the past, so you looked at this. And by the way, you can't take what I'm saying verbatim to you right now and make it your own sentence. I'd be plagiarizing. You have to put things in your own words, phrase things in your own way. Okay, what did the professor say in the video that goes with this document about the feedback provided? This video tells you what to do if you never made it. Oh yeah, all right. So let's ignore that question right there. Just forget that question right there. Ignore it. Now let's talk about if you didn't make any mistakes or you made very few mistakes. Then you'll say that, right? You can say, well, the professor didn't have a lot of deductions. In fact, she gave me full credit for the markup. So then you can tell me what this means. If I did not give you any deductions for the markup, what does that mean you did correctly? So what is what is that? If you think of, okay, let's say I said good job for markup. You got 0 points. So you can say that I said good job, but tell me what that implies. If you got full points for markup, what does that mean? Break it down. Well, that means I must have done a good job doing, the bracketing and numbering. And then what else do you have to do for the markup? Okay. So it's kind of implied feedback if I give you full points for something. Or if you got little, you can still comment on that. You can say, well, I didn't have a lot of mistakes, but I did have a few mistakes. So let's say you have only one mistake in your markup, then you can get into a little bit of detail about that. You can say, I only had one mistake for my markup. And she said, and if you want to, you can quote me. You can say, and I quote, blah, blah, blah. So you can quote me and what I said the mistake was, and that would be fine. You just can't do that. If you have a lot of feedback, you really can't quote me, but you can quote me sparingly. All right, so what else? To what extent do you think your performance for the assignments noted in Table 1 impacted your performance for the assignments noted in the left column? So I'm thinking really that this might be 2 paragraphs, depending on how much feedback you have, how many mistakes you made. If you made a lot of mistakes and you have a lot to compare and contrast, then I would recommend that your first paragraph is focused only on the first 1, 2, 3 questions. 4th questions. Okay, and then you start a new paragraph with this question right here, where I ask you about when you read feedback. This could be a 2nd paragraph. So for some of you, you might need to create 2 paragraphs because I don't like paragraphs that are too long. Notice that this one is now worth 30 points. Make sure you read this information in blue because while the points associated with this here in yellow might correspond with what you saw in the video for this, the points that you originally see, what you see in your template that you downloaded and or previous videos for these items might not correspond. I had to change the point distribution. All right, so this question right here. So I'm getting you to think, what I want you to think about is, you know, when you look at your scores here, your scores are an indication, right, of maybe how well you were able to focus in on lessons that built the foundation that you needed to do the argument analysis for a grade. So the idea is that to the extent that you really engaged here, that you took your notes, that you followed the videos, you used them all appropriately and as directed, the more you did that, the more likely you made it to get better scores over here. So this is where you're going to be reflective and subjective. You might have to speculate, imagine, interpret, introspect. Okay, so you'll go back up here and look at your scores. And then you'll tell me, you know, write a few sentences. So I think that my performance, you know, with respect to the task in table 1 definitely had an impact with respect to my scores in the left column for table 2. And then tell me why. You know, did you have high scores in table 1 and you have high scores in table 2? Do you have low scores in table 1, but you have high scores in table 2? Well, explain that. Why do you think that is? Well, you know, maybe you didn't take this as seriously as you could, but then you really started to hunker down and learn as much as you could from any refresher videos. You went and really studied your notes. Just, you know, make some kind of comment. Maybe you need to write, I would say, at least 2 or 3 sentences for this part, which is why I'm thinking this is going to be 2 paragraphs. All right, so for this last topic video, I should have that up by Tuesday around 5. Hi, Amorse.